Welcome to Pick and Flix, an event curated by me, Billy Collins, a BFI Film Academy young programmer. So what is Pick and Flix? Well, today, three brilliant young artists, a dancer, a composer, and a poet, are going to be responding to famous films about their respective crafts. If that sounds confusing, we've made a Poet Watch Dead Poet Society and then write a poem about it. So we're going to chat to each artist about their film and then see what wonderful creative things they've come up with in response. That sounds good. We'll get started. So I'm very, very excited to introduce our first artist. Rauri Paterson is a composer, artist, curator, performer and researcher from Southeast London. They are currently a new creative for the Institute of Contemporary Arts, NTS Radio and the BBC. We've made Rauri watch the 1984 film Amadeus, which charts the rivalry between composers Salieri and Mozart and boasts the most impressive array of wigs you will ever see on screen. Hello, Rauri. Hi, how are you doing?
Hi, Billy. Yeah, I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm very well. So, had you seen Amadeus before?
So I'd seen it once before when I was like in my early teens, and like I remember being kind of overwhelmed and it also being really long, so feeling a bit tired. But then simultaneously, like the thing that really struck me when I first watched it and still struck me again when I watched it for the second time just now was the like theatrical scenes. The ones set in the opera house and in the theatre were kind of amazing to watch. And it's bizarre to like see that relationship between the theatre on the screen, but it's also in a film, and how they managed to break the fourth wall and stuff in interesting ways. So that I found that really amazing, and I still did find it quite long.
It was the first time that I'd ever seen it watching it for this, and I saw 3-hour runtime, and I've got the attention span of like a sugared toddler, so I was kind of like, here we are. But yeah, very much enjoyed. So what kind of, you said you were impressed by the theatricality of it, like returning to it, was that still something that really struck you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the visuals, the kind of dedication to recreating the theatre scenes. I mean, I don't know much about theatrical history, but it was incredibly impressive, and especially all the kind of practical effects they used on stage. And it really struck me as an incredible piece of world making, and that kind of commitment to every single tiny element, which I guess you can have when you have a ginormous budget on a film. That was like one of the most visually impressive things that I found that I like stayed with me when I watched it again. Yeah.
Amazing. And you've come to us as our composer. I wondered what you thought about the way the film represents the art of composition.
Yeah, it's a bizarre one. It's a very successful portrayal of composition in a dramatic sense. It makes you feel really excited about the process of writing music and thinking like, wow, what an amazing display of talent and intellect. In terms of the reality of it, it's very much a dramatization. And there's that scene like towards the end of the film where Mozart is kind of dictating the Mozart Requiem to Salieri, and you're just kind of watching it like, this makes absolutely no sense at all. This would be not how anyone would write music unless they were a fictionalized version of a composer. And I think the way composition is portrayed in the film and the way the character of Mozart is portrayed in the film very much buys into this concept of the genius composer, the idea of the composer as the sort of divine, inspired, kind of above human, who can magically create music with no notes and no revisions and is perfect. And it also, yeah, this is kind of something that musicology and the way we kind of think about music history has we're trying to shake it off really in so many ways, because it's quite a damaging perspective to have on the act of writing music, the act of composition, and one that really relies on this kind of very masculine, very white, hegemonic idea of a composer as a sort of pure thing. And I thought, whilst that's really successful for a narrative, arc of the story, and to kind of have this kind of superhuman character of Mozart, it can be quite dangerous as well if that is your only interaction with classical music and classical composers, being, wow, this is obviously a person who has no relation to normal society. And in reality, the composers that we remember from that kind of period of time are remembered because they were extremely rich and aristocratic and had access to materials and players, and by virtue of their existence were white men. So that is something I have an issue with. But that's also, I think, not a wrong thing to have an issue with.
Yeah. And I think, again, I'm interested in that idea of genius in the film as well, and how kind of central it is, and whether, I guess what I want to know is what do you wish people knew about composing that they might not, if they see something like this that's kind of like, oh, well, you have to have some kind of innate, like, divine intervention.
Yeah, well, I mean, we know that Mozart had corrections and revisions to his pieces. He very much, was extremely talented, but didn't purely write music entirely conceived in his head. And to kind of portray the actor composing like that is quite exclusive, I think. And it's important to remember that even then, the way people write music now for, concerts or for the stage or for the screen, might practically work in a very different way if you're not working with, written notation, you're not working with manual forms, you're working with digital media. But the actual kind of ideas part of it, the way you come up with ideas might be, I don't know, I want composing to be a much more human and kind of instinctive and non-hierarchical activity, because the way we think of composers as being some kind of magical beings who write beautiful music is unhelpful.
Ooh, and I think that's a really kind of like that, opening it out and making it not necessarily, I mean, the improvisational, is that what improvisational aspect of your work and the response that you've created is really exciting as well, that you don't have to kind of have some kind of, I don't know, it doesn't have to be so planned, it can be created and more human. Can you tell me a little bit about where you started with responding to the film when you were making your piece, which is Ace, by the way, and we're going to look at it later.
Thanks. So my initial response, my initial thoughts were thinking about my relationship to Mozart as a composer, because, I did a kind of traditional music undergrad degree, studying mainly classical music, studying harmony and counterpoint and all these traditional things. And I remember in first year, my relationship with Mozart was quite a rocky one, because I felt really frustrated that I had to keep talking about Mozart, keep studying Mozart. So one of the ways that I kind of tried to, I don't know, I would just have to write this kind of analysis essay and think, how am I going to make this more interesting just for myself in the process, is I would take recordings of Mozart pieces like string quartets and some of his songs, and edit them and slow them down and combine them on top of each other so they sounded really unnatural, just to make my kind of auditory experience or write these essays a bit more interesting and bearable. So I thought, what if I take that as a starting point, find some different pieces of Mozart, really stretch them out, really kind of destroy them essentially, and then improvise on top of that. And the improvisatory elements, obviously we're in lockdown, I was kind of working with the things I had around me, and luckily I had my instruments and my synths and different microphones that are kind of essential to the way I can improvise now. And I wanted to capture the extremely frantic and energetic energy that Mozart often has in the film. He's kind of constantly writing to a deadline in a very active way. And I wanted to kind of symbolize that with the way I move my body around the space and flitting between different instruments. And also kind of just show a way of making music that would have been completely unavailable at that point in time, using the different technological elements. So trying to make music in a way that is very, wouldn't have been possible then, but is very possible now, but simultaneously try and like keep some of the energetic, performative quality of the film. Yeah.
Amazing. And you really capture that, like, I think the phrase they use about him is like too many notes, like there's a muchness of about like that everything's kind of too much all the time. And I really love the way that you've gone about it visually as well. Like it wasn't just kind of, we gave you a brief of like compose in response, and you've done something that is very like cinematic. And I wondered, like, have you worked much with composing for film before, and how that relationship tends to work between you and filmmakers?
Yeah, it's interesting because the bits of composing for film I've done before, it's quite an isolated activity. It's quite a distant activity. Even if the process that I would go about writing music would be quite collaborative or improvisatory, you're fundamentally probably making something in your room, sending it to someone who's also in their room by themselves, maybe not even talking about it that much. It will just be a kind of, do you like this? What about this? Who knows? And it's like in some ways more freeing and in some ways more restrictive. So with this, because I wanted to like keep that energy and keep it as a very performative, actively performative work, but also one that has a like interesting visual element, I wanted to like not just it be a static shot with me in one place playing something. I wanted to have their like both the camera and me being active elements as alongside the active sonic elements of the piece.
Cool. That's really interesting. That's so cool. Before we kind of wrap stuff up, I wondered if there was anything that you wanted to like share or plug, just in advance.
I'm in a small creative collective called the Mermaid Cafe with Jamal Ward, who's also a composer, and we released a single earlier in lockdown, which kind of encapsulates some of the ideas that go into the way I made the music for this video, and just more generally ideas of improvisation and manipulating sounds. And I think that might be an interesting thing for people to listen to as an indication of like the kind of work I do outside of this. And we're hopefully going to be releasing more music soon, or thinking about, well, trying to curate some events, but I don't think that will be very possible anytime soon. If I can urge anything to anyone working with composers or musicians at the moment, please be really respectful, please pay people, please treat people well, and understand that the pandemic has affected, well, people in all artistic occupations, but especially freelancers, in a very, very negative way. And I hope people not only treat the people working on their projects better, but also that people who are working on the projects feel more entitled to treat themselves better, and don't take contracts that are taking advantage of you, basically.
All good points. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Rauri, for joining us. It's been amazing, and I'm very, very excited now to share Rauri's response to Amadeus. So next up, we have Mandla Rae. Mandla is a queer Zimbabwean writer and performer. Their work explores power dynamics, trauma, and heritage. They are currently intrigued by the after effects of colonialism on their first language. Mandla is developing their first solo show, As British as a Watermelon, with funding from Arts Council England. For Mandla, we have the 1989 Ode to Good Teachers and Pasty Teenage Boys, Dead Poets Society, starring the much-loved and much-missed Robin Williams. Oh, Captain, my Captain. Let's go. Hello, Mandla. How are you doing?
Hey, Billy. I'm good. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Very well indeed. So tell me, had you seen Dead Poets Society before?
I had. I'd watched it when I was at university a couple of years ago now, a bit old. So I had forgotten most of what had happened. I sort of remembered it was about some boys at school and poetry, but a lot of the magic of it had been forgotten. So it was really nice to remember it and rewatch it and write about it.
I think I was in a similar kind of position. I think I watched it when I was younger. I don't remember why though. I feel like it's quite a rogue one to watch when you're like 12, just sort of soon. But I was very much returning to it. And what was it like? What was your sort of impression of it returning to it? Was there anything that kind of really struck you?
I kept thinking about and ended up writing about how I haven't really read most of the great poets, and I sort of managed to somehow become a poet with sort of dodging Chaucer at university and stuff. And
I love the idea of just swerving Chaucer casually.
I'm just no, I don't need it. I literally moved a module because I had to read Ulysses and didn't realise. Oh, yeah.
That's understandable, to be fair.
So and I suppose there's that curiosity now, oh, maybe I should check them out, but I've sort of been on a mission to decolonize my bookcase since I graduated, because I remember looking at it and just being okay, maybe I haven't read the great classic writers, but there are still a lot of white men here and not so much so still on that mission of
Amazing. And what do you think kind of more generally about the way that writing poetry or being a poet is represented in the film?
What I loved about it was it reminded me of when I was at uni, meeting other poets and that sort of pushing each other to kind of do scary things, perform a thing that you've written and share it with the class, and just the magic of being, because I studied English Lit and creative writing, so I really absolutely loved just having peers, people to write with, and share stuff with and sound things out with and talk about books with, and just that magic of I don't know, I suppose it's that thing of when you're at uni, you've sort of chosen your thing to focus on, so it's not so much reading it wasn't as cool when I was in secondary school, which is how old the boys are, aren't they? So, I think
you weren't getting your hood on and sort of going into a cave and reading poems together, no. Kind of secret society happening.
No, it was mostly me in a cave that is my room, writing poetry that never saw the light of day.
Well, it's going to see the light of day today. I'm very excited. And it has before, obviously, many times. And you've kind of worked a bit already with film before, right? Recently with Erecting Fringe of Colour. You've done some art film stuff for that, which sounds amazing. And I just wanted, does knowing that you're writing something for film affect how you write?
It's weird, actually. I've been thinking about that quite a lot, because usually when I perform, I am in front of the audience performing. I'm there, I see people's reaction, I know, I get people's feedback and stuff. So writing for film is a bit strange in that you just sort of put this thing out there, and then you're not really there for people to either love or hate it, or but I think that there's also something quite freeing in, I'm not necessarily thinking about like, oh, how is this going to translate to an audience, like does this make sense to other people. It feels like I can just sort of like, I don't know, just get on with it without worrying about other people's eyes. It's just like, no, this is just something that, yeah, happening for me.
Oh, that's so interesting. That's really cool. I get like to kind of like not have to, I guess like you say, it's like that sort of two-edged thing of like, it might feel less like there's a kind of climax where it's in front of people and then it's like, oh, I can relax now that that's done, but it's sort of that's delayed when it's like, and now it's visible for people and they're watching it but you're not there with them.
Yeah.
It's kind of a slightly more detached experience, but to have something that you can really kind of craft and take time over is really ace. And then I think there's a lot of films about poets. I think about things like what it's called now, Kill Your Darlings with Daniel Radcliffe, lots of films like The Hours, things like that. But I wondered in a more general sense, do you think film can be poetic? I guess what can filmmakers learn from poets?
I think film can definitely be poetic. I'm now doing that thing where I can't remember any film that I have ever watched, but like Rafiki, I feel like that film is poetry. Like it's a lot of looks and there's not much language and there's just so much emotion. And yeah, I think that like I definitely get a lot of inspiration from film and visual art, and I think it works like the other way around, that visual artists can also be inspired by poets and by writers. Well, they do work with writers.
Like what do you think filmmakers can learn from poets, and how film can be poetic? But I think it's interesting saying about how something like Rafiki that is maybe less kind of dialogue driven and there's so much in the emotion and the kind of subtext of it is really interesting. Is there anything else you can sort of develop on that? I love like, I don't know, like films that are like mostly emotions, like I don't know, like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, that just makes me feel so much and there's so much happening. And I don't know, I think filmmaking is the same as poetry in that it's telling a story in some kind of way, and I think there's lots of different mediums. And so like I feel like when I started off writing, I'd sort of be like, oh yeah, like this is just a poem, but then as I continued, something that I started off writing thinking it was a poem has ended up being my solo show, and it's like now a whole theatre piece. And even when I was making the Fringe of Colour piece, I think there was like, I was just such like looking for lots of words and language and thinking about like, and I suppose like, thinking about like, I think poetry is, what is a poem? It looks different to everyone, and that's something that I sort of talk about in my, like when I lead poetry writing groups, I sort of like tell writers like, don't think, oh, I'm going to like write a poem, because then you start thinking about like, oh, it should be like this or it should be like this, but like think about what you want to say and say that. And I think a lot of film is very inspiring in that way of like, just the way that stories are told, and emotions are felt. I cry so much in cinema, and just like that, that ability to evoke feeling in people is a really important element in film that's also there in poetry. Yeah, that's so interesting. That kind of, not like you're saying about your solo show starting out as originally just like not just a poem, but like being a poem and then kind of becoming something that you didn't know. It feels like a very kind of very like open and fluid process that I guess you don't hear about as much in film, where it's like we have to do this because there's a schedule that we have to stick to, but maybe there's something there about like being able to be open to kind of exploring things and discovering things as you go.
Yeah, definitely.
That's so cool. And that's really great advice for young poets as well, about not thinking of writing a poem. And I'm just thinking about like maybe that can work for filmmakers as well. Like don't think you have to make a film. Like
definitely. Don't think you're writing a script. You might just find yourself doing that. Like, I don't know, like just playing around with words and telling stories is
Brilliant. So let's talk a little bit about your creative response piece, which is incredibly powerful and beautiful, and I love the way that you've taken like lines from the film and things like that, as we'll see. But can you tell me a little bit about how you approached responding to Dead Poets Society?
So I suppose it was because it was a really like emotional film. Like, it's very sad, and I was like, oh God, I have all of these feelings. How do I communicate that? And I think I sort of like, I watched it a couple of times actually. I think I watched it like 2 or 3 times. And I was there with my journal, just being like, okay, which bits am I like feeling the most? And like, I think that like moment where, was that Shelley? I really don't know these poets gathering the Carpe Diem scene. And I think, I was just like, okay, that's the whole, to me, that's the whole point of the film, like this encouragement to like seize the day and be who you want to be. And like, that just, I don't know, as like a queer poet, a creative, there's like, I don't know, lots of like childhood feelings of just kind of like, oh my God, I'm like thinking back, like I'm like this person who I wanted to be when I was growing up, and I've like carved out that existence for myself. And it was like, but I suppose I was also thinking about like in saying that, like me not having like read many of the poets that inspired them, but also there are lots and lots of poets to inspire lots of different types of people. And I suppose like thinking about academia and like who are the great poets was quite interesting. That I'll like do a lot of workshops where lots of people have heard of Shelley and Byron, but not so much like Audre Lorde and like June Jordan, Alice Walker, and thinking back to my own experience in academia where I had to literally decolonize my bookshelf as a result of all the books that I bought didn't really have people who looked like me in them, or what like and I suppose like thinking about that in the sense of like, oh, there's this idea of like, oh, you can just like be a poet and you can seize the day, but not everyone actually has that time, that chance. And it feels like there's a like poetry circles, poetry in academic scenarios, the arts in general, it's very a lot of work needs to be done in changing what people look like, and who is cast in films, who is given platforms in order to grow and thrive. And like but I think there's a lot of great stuff happening, but like I suppose I just kind of like reflected a lot on the state of the world. And I suppose what like the Dead Poets Society is a film essentially about a lot of people who do not look like me and who have a lot more privilege than I have, and I don't know.
Before we share your piece, which is amazing, is there anything you'd like to plug or share with us, just that we can tell people to look out for in future?
So what can I plug? I have, speaking of lots of film actually, I've also during lockdown I got to commission 6 artists to make a bunch of new work. So we've got 5 new films. One was a collaboration between 2 artists, for Journeys Fest, which is usually in Manchester, but it's all digital this year. And so the brief that we sent was freedom of movement, and all the artists are from refugee and asylum seeking backgrounds, and all of them are exploring that topic in the films, and that will be out on the 1st of October on the Journeys website.
But thank you so much for joining us, and I'm very excited to now share Mandla's piece in response to Dead Poet Society.
Who are the old gods? The original masculine poets, gathering rosebuds while Lord is my reminder that one day I will wither away, instilling in me what power it is to speak. I've not read much of the old gods, and the griots aren't as archived as the original masculine poets. I started writing without the confines of rhythm and rhyme. Then I tried to slip into sestinas and sonnets, but they never quite fit my androgynous frame. Decolonizing a structure begins with language. Ukuluma ganjan. How do you speak? A poem would take into consideration the senses of a crisp autumn day, the sound of a falling leaf landing on your cheek. Who has the time for carpe diem? Which of us choose our own names, and what is it that we are giving back to the self in shedding old skin, stripping away who we were expected to be? The nature of the written word is, what do you hold dear? How do we cling to the moments we would otherwise forget? Particularly the most mundane. I haven't read much of the original masculine poets. I was too busy disappointing my father.
Well, last but by no means least, I'm joined by Yandass. Yandass is a dancer and choreographer based in Manchester with credits across theatre, film and television. She's performed at the likes of the Manchester International Festival, the Royal Exchange Theatre, the Bristol Old Vic, the Lyric Hammersmith, Channel 4's Random Acts and many, many more. Yandass was tasked with watching Billy Elliot, released in the year 2000. It follows Jamie Bell as Billie, an aspiring ballet dancer who is taken under the wing of a chain-smoking and rather iconic Julie Walters. Yandass, hello. Thank you very much for joining.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you for the very, very, very nice intro. That was lovely. Thank you.
My pleasure. So we'll just jump straight in then. So have you seen Billy Elliot before?
No. Surprisingly, it's just one of those films where I felt like I'd seen so many adaptations of it that I was like, oh, I know what it's about and I don't need to watch it. But oh my god, yeah, it was incredible.
What was your kind of like first impression off the back of watching it?
I just felt like it was so relatable as a dancer. And I was crying that I had to keep pausing it so many times because I was just crying throughout so much of it. But I don't know whether it's because of obviously what we're going through as a society, and it felt like there were so many emotions going around for both the family and like individual characters, and then to sort of see that journey being translated through dance after every scene or after like each little phrase, it solidified it for me on a personal level, and just made it like really beautiful but also really tragic at points.
Yeah. It's a very like I guess like hopeful film as well. Like I hadn't seen it for ages. I think I must have watched it when I was a kid or something, and came back to watch it for this. And then kind of like the rest of the day, I was like smiling, like wandering around, like everything's possible. It's fine.
Definitely, definitely, and it gives off that. It's that reminder of like that as artists, our job in situations where sometimes it feels really hard to find, I guess, the humor and the hope, and not even that, the other side of it, the mirror, and all those stories that can keep being possible, even through like the gutter. And I think that's what that felt like. So yeah, it felt very hopeful in that sense. I was definitely smiling, and the tears were very much like just like beautiful, uncontrollably moving tears, and that kind of there's something that my friend, a filmmaker, Sam Jones, Sam Abba, that he always says that dance, and that for him it feels like as a non-dancer he's now being able to connect with the fact that dance can be a very, very good storytelling device and storytelling tool, and really understanding that it's more than just the movement, but really understanding the emotion behind it and how emotive it can be, and that kind of kinesthetic sort of energy that it has to its audience, and that it makes you really, like, especially when you're watching a film like that, you end up moving with it, and you start, really connecting in more just like than just watching it. You really start moving in your body and you start feeling it. So then it really does trigger off for the rest of the day because you got involved and you participated within the film, even if it's only like a tiny movement. Mm-hmm. So yeah, no, it was a beautiful film.
It's really cool to hear you talk as well about like working with filmmakers as well. I wanted, because you've obviously danced a lot like in live performance, but also on film. And I wondered, how does being filmed or being on a film set affect how you feel as a dancer? Like, does it feel really different to being in front of a live audience?
Yeah, definitely. I think obviously like an audience always gives you there's always that energetic energy that you can feel immediately, and that kind of bouncing off, and the nerves are a little bit more realer because you kind of, if you mess up, you mess up. If you don't, everything is very, very much live. And you kind of, and that kind of feeling is taken away, in film, but also it can be an advantage as well, because you obviously get a chance to like redo things that you in what you feel like is your best version or what the filmmaker wants, and there's kind of endurance. You have to have a lot of endurance to just be able to kind of keep going over the same thing. So yeah, I like them both for separate reasons. I think I like the live element because it feels like you're a little bit more in control, and you're a little bit more like it's up to you, and you have to connect with the audience and feed off that. Whereas with film, yeah, you can kind of let go a little bit, and it's a lot more. The film is always important.
And
the film is always
sorry.
Yeah, the film is always the priority. So it's about getting the right shot as much as it is about your movement.
Okay, that's really interesting. I guess like getting that right shot, is that like, do you have conversations with the filmmaker then about like how you're going to be moving with the camera? Do you decide those shots in advance? How does it kind of?
It honestly depends. It depends on how collaborative the filmmaker is as well, and I think you have to be agile as well in having in knowing that some people are really collaborative, and maybe you might even get a chance to like watch it a little bit. But I think it's more about it definitely it depends. But I think pre-plans are always help, and having that and emphasizing your points a little bit earlier. I think for dancers a lot more the conversation becomes the beforehand, and making sure that you say your techniques and how you work a little bit earlier, so that by the time you get to the film, that's already planned in and that's already set in. If you know that you want lots more breaks in between or whatever, or you want time for people to be able to stretch in between and like come back, because you know that gives energy, but something that the filmmaker wouldn't have necessarily took into account. So it's always good to be very clear about your technique and how you work, so that that's factored in, because with film there's so much more to think about, not just what's being shot. You know, the lighting person might want to take something again because of the light and not because of what you're doing. So yeah, I think film is definitely a more collaborative and a lot more like be prepared a lot earlier and be on your thing and express your point. Yeah.
And keeping that like communication open and like making sure, like you say,
definitely.
like
yeah.
saying up front like this is, and it's so interesting to hear you talk about like how you fit into some like a much bigger thing where like everyone's got their own thing that they're trying to do, but everyone needs to be able to work together in order for that to happen.
Definitely. Yeah.
I wonder if you could tell me a bit about how you went about responding to the film in your creative response piece, which is amazing, and I'm so excited to share it. I get like I'm saying this about everyone's, but it's so cool. So how did you approach that?
So I wanted to respond to it with freestyle, because I think that's the most impulsive that I can be as a dancer, and also because I became detected by the music as well as like influenced by the film itself. So I wanted to be as truthful to my emotions towards the film as possible. And yeah, I just kind of danced it out. I think for me as when I freestyle, especially, I kind of have like my little points that I either want to hit or in between, or things that just keep sticking out. And for me, there was something about the dance, obviously the main dance that Billy does to his father when he's at the gym / Valerie. And there's like a little sign where he does where it's like a strong pause, and it's like power, and it's like but then he like does like all the footwork, and then it goes off and it starts like dancing in the street. That's kind of the journey that I was like looking at, because I feel like beautifully that dance itself, like a musical theatre song that kind of wraps up the story, that dances that. And again, like in terms of that structure as well in the film, it was beautiful to kind of see all these dancers that were either like, you know, reflecting what's just happened or kind of progressing the story a little bit further, but then having like a motif, and then that one dance that kind of was repeated at the end as well. Not at the end of the audition kind of thing, with a little bit bigger and a little bit more performative.
I mean, that's something like the way you talk about like how you wanted to do it freestyle, because it's really impulsive, I think reflects the film really nicely as well, because like when he's dancing, it's often just like because he can't like articulate something that he wants to say, so he dances how he feels, and it's just that's why I think it's so emotive. I think it's so kind of like, I don't know, I'm very like, I know very little about dance, so I just sort of watched it, I'm like, oh, that's how that feels in that moment. And at the climax of the film, he's at his like Royal Ballet audition, and it seems to be going really badly, and then he gets asked what does it feel like when you dance, and he gives that like famous answer, it feels like electricity. And I wondered if it's really cheesy, but I'm gonna ask you the same question. So what does it feel like when you dance?
All right, okay. How I describe it, because I also do like other art forms. I always say like for me, acting feels like I'm sort of portraying a version of myself. Yeah, that's how I'd say, like I'm portraying a version of myself, and then singing or like, you know, rapping or spoken word, it kind of feels like I'm expressing myself, but in a, you know, lyrically with words. And I can sort of like use language and manipulate language, you know, in whatever way. But dancing sort of feels like a bigger version of myself. It just feels like you just can never, like, it's just you, whatever you're not. And I feel like everyone is a dancer in the sense of, like, even the way that I'm moving my hands now, like, to me that's a dance. And it's because the point that I'm saying, I can't emphasize it, it's bigger than me. I feel like it's that your body feels like it wants to then say it. It's like, I always give an example of, like, when you're waiting, you know, and people like tap their foot because you're waiting. It's because the waiting isn't just something that you're feeling, isn't just something that you're thinking about, isn't just, it's in your body. So your body literally wants to let it out and wants to be like, okay, I'm tired of waiting. I will really like this. Do you know what I mean? Or if you're shaking because you're angry, because you literally, that your body wants to be able to express itself the same way that your mouth does, the same way that, you know, you express yourself with words, the same way that you express yourself with your eyes, the same way that you express, you know, your body always wants to do that. So I feel like dancing is like things that you cannot say, the emotions that you feel every time, but you can't say. So then you have to use actions, and then this, putting, like, all I have to do is just this, and then be like, okay, actually I want to slow it down or make it bigger, and then that becomes a dance. But essentially all I'm doing is just what my body wants to do.
So yeah, cool. So interesting. Amazing. Okay, well, before we wrap up and share your creative response piece, I just wanted to ask if there is anything you want to plug, any projects you've got coming up that you want to tell people about, just before we move on to the last bit.
Yeah, actually, there's a project that just went public about that I'm working with Sam Abel, who I mentioned before, and it's we're basically celebrating freestyle dancers in Manchester in various venues that unfortunately for different reasons are at different stages because of lockdown, but also for themselves. It's just like it's for us, it's also like celebrating the venues that we have, and just reminding the audience that, you know, artists are still here, the venues are still here, and we're still collaborating, and hopefully when it's possible, the audience will still join us and support us to actually, like, you know, push it even further and see what the next phase of the arts world is, because I do feel like it's definitely a next phase, like in whatever the art world is. We're definitely going into a new turn.
And what's that called, sorry?
It's called I Impact. And yeah, you can follow it on Instagram as well at i.m.pact_.
Amazing. Sick. Well, thank you so much, Yandass. It's been amazing to have you.
Thank you for inviting me. Like, it's been lovely, and again I got to watch Billy Elliot, which is a classic that I should have been watching, but yeah, it's one of my favorite now.
Oh, fantastic. Also chuffed. Okay, well, we will go on to your creative response then. Thank you so much.
Sick.
Thank you for watching this event, and please look out for more events curated by BFI Film Academy young programmers during the BFI London Film Festival.